cowbell rings once, then goes quiet. A man in rubber boots checks a fence line at 5:40 in the morning, the same fence his grandfather checked. Somewhere below, a train enters a tunnel on time, to the minute, as it has for decades. A shutter opens, a window box of red geraniums catches the first light. This is Switzerland, and none of what you just saw was staged for a camera. Switzerland is a country of roughly 9 million people, wedged between Germany, France, Italy, Austria, and Liechtenstein, and it is, by almost every measure, one of the wealthiest, most orderly, most envied places on earth. And yet it is a country with 4 national languages, almost no flatland to farm, no natural harbour, and no single dominant language. Official figures put German speakers at around 62% of the population, French speakers at about 23%, Italian speakers near 8%, and Romansh speakers at under 1%. A nation that, on paper, should not hold together and somehow always has. It is a democracy so direct that citizens can force a public vote on many laws, and yet its financial capitals move some of the most opaque private wealth on the planet. It is ranked among the safest, cleanest, most functional nations in existence, and it is also one of the most expensive places a person can simply try to live. It is not perfect because it lacks contradictions. It is remarkable because it has learned, generation after generation, to live inside them. The land itself refuses to be simple. A little under 60% of Switzerland's surface is mountainous, and a large share of the country is alpine terrain, folding the map into ridgelines, glacial valleys, and passes that were, for most of history, nearly impassable in winter. The Rhine, the Rhone, and the Inn all rise here, which is why Switzerland is sometimes called the water tower of Europe. The country holds a significant share of the continent's freshwater reserves in its glaciers, lakes, and rivers, feeding nations that never see a single Swiss mountain. There are over 1,500 lakes scattered across the country, from the vast sweep of Lake Geneva in the southwest to the fjord-like arms of Lake Lucerne, hemmed in by peaks on every side. The Swiss Alps around the Jungfrau, Eiger, and Aletsch Glacier were inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2001, protecting the largest glacier in the Alps, a river of ice more than 20 kilometers long, now visibly retreating year by year. The Matterhorn, jutting above Zermatt in a pyramid so symmetrical it looks almost designed, is arguably the most photographed mountain on the planet, and it was not conquered by climbers until 1865 at a cost of 4 lives on the descent. A reminder that this landscape has never been merely scenic. Switzerland's trail network runs to more than 65,000 kilometers of signposted hiking paths, maintained by a national federation and marked with the same yellow signage from the Jura to the Engadine, so that a hiker can, in theory, walk the length of the country on infrastructure as reliable as its railways. None of this geography is decorative. It is the reason villages sit where they sit, the reason roads switch back instead of running straight, the reason a farm in one canton can look nothing like a farm 40 kilometers away. The mountains did not just shape the scenery, they shaped the temperament, cautious, exact, and used to solving problems that gravity does not forgive twice. That same exactness follows people indoors. Mornings in Switzerland tend to start early and quietly, coffee and a piece of bread eaten standing at the counter, radios kept low, front doors closed without a slam. There are unwritten rules here that carry more weight than posted ones. Quiet hours, known informally as Ruhezeit in German-speaking regions, are widely observed on Sundays and at midday. No lawnmowers, no drilling, no loud renovations, an entire country agreeing, without much discussion, to leave one day mostly alone. Even flushing a toilet loudly after 10 at night is, in some older apartment buildings, treated as a minor breach of etiquette between neighbors who otherwise barely speak. Punctuality is not a virtue here so much as a baseline expectation. A train arriving 90 seconds late draws visible irritation on a platform, and a person arriving 5 minutes late to a private dinner is expected to apologize, sometimes at length. Recycling is sorted with a precision that borders on ceremony. Glass by color, paper bundled and tied, certain municipalities requiring official prepaid rubbish bags before trash will even be collected at the curb, with unauthorized bags left conspicuously, sometimes permanently, on the sidewalk. Doing laundry in a shared apartment building often runs on a strict posted rotation, a schedule known informally as the Waschküchenordnung, and missing your slot can mean waiting a week for the next one. You greet shopkeepers on entering and leaving even the smallest corner store, a habit visitors often miss and locals quietly notice. None of this is enforced by police. It is enforced by neighbors, by glances, by the quiet social pressure of a culture that treats order as a form of respect for the people around you. You learn the rules not from a manual, but from the silence that follows breaking one. Where people actually live complicates the postcard further. Switzerland has one of the lowest rates of home ownership in Europe. Around 36% of households own their home, according to the Federal Statistical Office, meaning close to 2/3 of the population rents, a figure closer to what you would expect in a country of transient renters than in one of the world's richest nations. In cities, the imbalance sharpens. Ownership rates in Basel-Stadt and Geneva sit below 20%, while rural, mountainous cantons like Appenzell, Innerrhoden and Valais see ownership above 50%. Part of the explanation is structural. Swiss banks typically require substantial equity, and homeowners are taxed on the theoretical rental value of a house they live in themselves, an arrangement that quietly discourages buying. Part of it is cultural. Renting here carries none of the stigma it carries elsewhere, protected by tenant laws strong enough that many Swiss families rent the same apartment for decades, passing down not a deed but a lease. Ownership in Switzerland is not the finish line, it is sold as elsewhere. Stability is. That stability has its own institutions, cooperative housing associations, particularly strong in Zürich and Basel, build and manage apartment blocks at rents held deliberately below market rate, run not for profit but for members, some of whom wait years on a list for a unit their grandparents might once have lived in. It is not uncommon for a Swiss family to occupy the same rented flat for 30 or 40 years, repainting it, raising children in it, growing old in it, with no deed ever changing hands. The result is a housing culture built less around accumulation than around continuity. An apartment is somewhere you plant roots, not an asset you flip. Food in Switzerland reads like a map of its own geography and history, dish by dish. In the mountain cantons, fondue, a communal pot of melted Gruyère and vacherin fribourgeois, wine and a touch of kirsch, eaten by dipping bread on long forks, was born of necessity, a way to use hardened cheese and stale bread through long Alpine winters, and it has since become the country's most iconic culinary symbol. Raclette, from the Valais region, involves melting a wheel of cheese directly by an open flame and scraping the molten layer over potatoes and accompaniments such as pickled onions, a dish whose name literally means to scrape. Rösti, a pan of shredded and fried potato, is so associated with German-speaking Switzerland that the informal cultural boundary between the German and French-speaking regions is nicknamed the Rusty Graben, the Rusty Ditch, a term used only half-jokingly to describe how differently the two linguistic halves of the country sometimes vote and think. In Ticino, the Italian-speaking south, risotto and polenta dominate instead, cooked with butter and Alpine cheese rather than olive oil, a regional accent as clear as the language spoken there. Zürcher Geschnetzeltes, strips of veal in a cream and mushroom sauce served with Rusty, is a Zurich staple born in the city's restaurants rather than its farms. Against these come the everyday foods that never make it onto a tourist menu. Schurvelat, the humble, cheap sausage so beloved it has been called the unofficial national symbol, grilled at every roadside stand and campfire. Bircher muesli, the raw oat, fruit, and yogurt breakfast invented by a Zurich doctor in the 1900s as health food, now eaten in every household. Chocolate, meanwhile, sits at the intersection of both worlds. Swiss producers pioneered milk chocolate and conching techniques in the 19th century, turning a farmer's dairy surplus into a luxury export recognized worldwide. And bread itself varies canton to canton, valley to valley, in a country with over 200 officially recognized bread varieties, each one a small edible flag. In the mountain canton of Graubünden, Kapuns wraps a filling of dried meat, flour and herbs in charred leaves, a dish designed to stretch a small amount of protein through a long winter, while further down the valley, Bundener Fleisch, air-dried beef cured in the thin, cold mountain wind for months at high altitude, turns preservation itself into a delicacy. Basler Leckerli, a spiced honey and almond biscuit associated with Basel's winter markets, traces its origins back centuries to the spice trade routes that once passed through the city on the Rhine, and in autumn, chestnuts roasted over open braziers appear across Ticino, a legacy of centuries when chestnut flour, not wheat, was the staple carbohydrate of poorer Alpine communities on the Italian-speaking side of the country. The gap between cervelat at a campsite and fondue served in a candlelit Alpine chalet is the gap between how Switzerland actually eats and how it is sold. And both are true at once. That same doubling runs through the country's sense of itself. Switzerland is not one culture wearing one flag. It is 4 linguistic regions, loosely federated into 26 cantons, each with real autonomy over education, taxation, and local law. Officially, as noted, German speakers make up around 62% of the population, French speakers about 23%, Italian speakers roughly 8%, and Romansh, a Latin-descended language spoken almost nowhere else on Earth, under 1%, clinging on mostly in the canton of Graubünden. The informal border between German and French-speaking Switzerland, the Röstigraben already mentioned, is more than a culinary joke. It shows up in referendum results, in television habits, in which newspapers people read, in how directly people speak to strangers. There is no equivalent hostility here, only a kind of mutual good-natured distance. A French-speaking Genevan and a German-speaking farmer in Appenzell may share a passport and almost nothing else in daily rhythm. Bern's federal government conducts its business in the country's main official languages. As a matter of course, a linguistic balancing act that would strain most nations and that Switzerland treats mostly as Tuesday. 4 cantons, Bern, Fribourg, Valais, and Graubünden, are themselves officially multilingual, meaning road signs, school curricula, and local government can shift language within the same administrative border. Foreign nationals now make up more than a quarter of the resident population, adding Portuguese, Albanian, and Serbo-Croatian to the everyday soundscape of Swiss cities. Languages that outrank Romansh in raw speaker numbers, even though Romansh alone carries the symbolic weight of a founding national tongue. Swiss school children are typically required to learn a second national language, with English often coming later, though the exact order varies by canton and remains politically contested in recent years as English creeps further into workplaces and universities, edging out the very domestic multilingualism the education system was designed to protect. That diversity finds its loudest expression in festivals that are centuries old and still packed. The Fête des Vignerons, a wine growers' festival held in Vevey on the shores of Lake Geneva, takes place roughly once a generation, the most recent in 2019, and draws hundreds of thousands of spectators to watch a spectacle recognized by UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage tradition. Basel's Fastnacht, an explosive three-day carnival of drumming, piccolo music, and elaborate lantern processions, begins each year at precisely 4 in the morning, with a city-wide blackout known as the Morgenstreich. In Zürich, Sechseleuten marks the symbolic end of winter each April by burning an enormous snowman effigy called the Berg atop a bonfire, with local tradition holding that the faster its head explodes, the better the coming summer will be. Alpine wrestling, or Schwingen, fought in a ring of sawdust between competitors in linen shorts, remains one of the most watched traditional sports in the country, culminating every 3 years in the Eidgenössisches Schwing- und Elblerfest, a festival that regularly draws over 100,000 spectators to a temporary stadium built for the occasion. The Alphorn, a wooden horn sometimes reaching 4 meters in length, and the accordion-driven sound of Ländler music still soundtrack village gatherings that have nothing to do with tourism. And set against all of this stands a very different institution, the World Economic Forum, convening every January in the ski resort of Davos, bringing heads of state and global finance into the same alpine valleys where farmers still lead cattle up to summer pasture. In rural cantons, the Alpabzug, the autumn cattle descent from high summer pastures back down to the valley, remains a genuine working tradition rather than a staged one. Cows crowned with flowered headdresses and oversized bells only on the final ceremonial walk home after a season spent grazing above the tree line. Hornesen, a peculiar rural sport sometimes described as a distant cousin of golf and baseball, is still played on village greens across the Emmental and Bernese regions, complete with wooden paddles the size of small doors. And each February, the town of Lenzburg and dozens of others still stage smaller Fastnacht-style processions of their own, distinct from Basel's, proof that the carnival tradition runs far wider and more locally than any single festival can capture. Old and new Switzerland do not so much collide here as coexist, often within sight of each other. The history beneath all of this begins earlier than most visitors imagine. Archaeological sites around Swiss lakes preserve pile-dwelling settlements dating back roughly 6,000 years, structures built on stilts over the water, now recognized collectively by UNESCO across sites shared with 5 other Alpine countries. The traditional founding story of the Swiss Confederacy centers on William Tell, the legendary marksman forced to shoot an apple off his son's head, and on an oath supposedly sworn in 1291 by representatives of 3 forest cantons on a meadow called the Rütli. Historians are now fairly confident that Tell himself never existed as a historical figure. His story appears to be a later folk legend layered onto real events. But the year 1291 and the alliance it represents are documented fact, marked by an actual surviving federal charter, and August 1st is still celebrated nationally as Swiss National Day because of it. The Reformation split the country religiously in the 16th century, with reformers Huldrych Zwingli in Zurich and later John Calvin in Geneva, turning Swiss cities into centers of Protestant theology that reshaped religious life far beyond Switzerland's own borders, while other cantons remained staunchly Catholic, a divide whose fault lines still shape cantonal culture today. Switzerland's modern posture of armed neutrality, formally recognized internationally in 1815 at the Congress of Vienna, kept it outside both world wars, even as it sat at the geographic heart of the conflict. And in 1863, a Geneva businessman named Henry Dunant, horrified by the aftermath of the Battle of Solferino, founded the International Committee of the Red Cross, an institution headquartered in Switzerland to this day, and one whose emblem is the reverse of the Swiss flag. Dunant would go on to share the first ever Nobel Peace Prize in 1901, a fitting origin for a country that, by the 20th century, had turned its neutrality into an entire diplomatic industry, hosting the League of Nations in Geneva after the First World War, and later a cluster of United Nations agencies that remain there still. Switzerland only joined the United Nations itself in 2002, choosing to remain outside the organization for decades. It was a nation willing to host the world's diplomacy while remaining reluctant, for most of its modern history, to formally join anyone's side. Modern Switzerland runs on an economy built less on scale than on precision. Zürich anchors global banking and insurance. Basel is the beating heart of pharmaceutical research, home to giants like Novartis and Roche. Geneva hosts international diplomacy alongside private banking and, just across the border, the physics of CERN. And the Vallée de Joux and Jura Mountains remain the ancestral home of Swiss watchmaking, where firms like Patek Philippe and Audemars Piguet still assemble movements by hand. Small and medium-sized family enterprises make up the overwhelming majority of Swiss companies, quietly manufacturing the precision components for watches, for machinery, for medical devices that rarely carry a Swiss name on the label but are built almost nowhere else with the same tolerances. Education here runs on a dual-track apprenticeship system unusual by global standards. Roughly 2/3 of students in upper secondary education, including many who will go on to become engineers and executives, choose vocational apprenticeships over purely academic high school paths, splitting their week between a classroom and a paid position at a real company. It is a system widely credited with keeping Swiss youth unemployment among the lowest in Europe. And running beneath all of it, literally, is the Gotthard Base Tunnel. At 57 kilometers, the longest railway tunnel on Earth, opened in 2016 after 17 years of construction through the heart of the Alps, allowing freight and passenger trains to cross from northern to southern Europe on a nearly flat, high-speed line instead of climbing a mountain pass. It is engineering as a statement of national character. If the terrain will not move, Switzerland will simply go through it. Above ground, the country's railway network is itself a kind of national showpiece. Punctuality rates are consistently high, and the Glacier Express and Bernina Express routes, both part of the UNESCO-listed Rhaetian railway landscape, are considered engineering landmarks in their own right, not just scenic routes for tourists. Zug, a small canton south of Zurich, has become an unlikely global hub for commodity trading and, more recently, cryptocurrency firms, drawn by tax rates that are famously low even by Swiss standards, proof that Switzerland's economic identity is still being rewritten, canton by canton, in real time. But paradise, if that is even the right word for it, comes with a price tag that residents feel every month. Switzerland is consistently ranked among the most expensive countries on Earth to live in. Grocery bills, health insurance premiums, and rents in cities like Zurich and Geneva regularly stun newcomers, and that two-thirds renting statistic from earlier is not a lifestyle choice for everyone. For many, it is simply the only option a normal salary allows. Integration for outsiders is its own quiet obstacle course. Swiss citizenship can require 10 years of residency, a demonstrated grasp of civic norms, and, in smaller communities, an actual vote by fellow residents on whether to accept a given applicant. Foreign nationals make up over a quarter of the country's population, and yet the path to formally becoming Swiss remains one of the most demanding in Europe. Tourism, meanwhile, has become its own quiet threat to the places it celebrates. Certain Alpine villages and glacier viewpoints now strain under visitor numbers that dwarf their year-round population, while the very ice sheets travelers come to photograph, including sections of the Aletsch Glacier itself, are retreating at rates that alarm scientists monitoring them. Can a culture built on quiet, unwritten order survive being turned into a destination? Can a country this small keep absorbing people drawn by its wealth without diluting the very cohesion that produced that wealth? And what happens to alpine farming communities, some centuries old, when the glaciers and snowpack they have always depended on for water and grazing simply begin to disappear? Switzerland does not have tidy answers to any of this. It is not being asked to have them by tomorrow. But the pressure is real, and it is not going away. Switzerland's population is aging alongside the rest of Western Europe, straining a pension system built on assumptions from a much younger country. While healthcare premiums, mandatory for most residents and not tied directly to income, climb a little further nearly every year, eating into salaries that already look, on paper, more generous than they feel by the end of the month. Direct democracy, one of the country's proudest exports as an idea, also means that unpopular but necessary reforms on everything from pension age to housing construction can be stalled for years by a single successful referendum. And there is a quieter tension too, rarely spoken about on camera, a culture that prizes conformity and quiet as forms of mutual respect can also make genuine belonging, for a newcomer, feel perpetually just out of reach, no matter how fluent the dialect or how many years on the lease. The man from the opening is still out there, most likely, moving cattle along a fence line his family has walked for generations, in a country that runs its trains to the minute and cannot decide, some years, whether it is one nation or four living politely side by side. The geraniums are still in the window. The lake is still impossibly still at dawn. None of it resolves into something simpler the longer you look. The wealth and the discipline, the beauty and the cost, the old oath on a mountain meadow and the tunnel drilled straight through the mountain beneath it. Switzerland does not ask to be understood all at once. It asks to be watched closely, the way you would watch weather change over a valley, slowly and without expecting the sky to make up its mind. Perhaps that is the only honest thing that can be said about a country built entirely on the tension between what the land allows and what its people insist on anyway. Thank you for spending this time in the mountains with us. If this kind of close, honest look at a place, the beauty alongside the cost of it, is something you want more of, consider subscribing. There are more countries like this one waiting, each with its own contradictions worth sitting with.